Righteous Felon Craft Jerky is the official jerky of BellyUpSports. For over a decade, Righteous Felon Craft Jerky has led the American meat snack revolution by concocting delicious, adventurous, U.S.-sourced jerky recipes for uncompromising carnivores across the country. With 15 different flavors to choose from, Righteous Felon has all jerky lovers covered, and by using promo code BELLYUP, you will get 15% off your purchase at RighteousFelon.com. Do your taste buds a favor today and rip into a bag of Righteous Felon jerky.
I think it's time to rip the Band-Aid off. We've alluded to it. We've talked a little bit about it. I'll be the one to say it. U.S. men's national team hitting the big red button and going full reset.
I mean, you can throw the other CONCACAF team if you want there into this one as well.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think we do need to put both of them in the same category here. Just the CONCACAF explosion, and not in the good way. It is the negative CONCACAF explosion. Like you said, Mexico losing their head coach, crashing out of that team, out of this Copa. The U.S. I have no words for what just happened with the U.S. too. So those two, and I imagine how I feel about the U.S. team is exactly how Mexican national team fans feel about that team.
I think we're legitimately the Spider-Man meme. I think we're literally the Spider-Man meme with Mexico. All the complaints that the U.S. fans have about the U.S. men's national team, you can literally have the same conversation about the Mexican national team. As a matter of fact, I think people are even having those discussions of, man, that 2002 U.S. men's national team will mop the floor out of this current U.S. men's national team. And I'm sure that they're also saying, man, that 2002 Mexican national team would have mollywopped this current Mexican national team. It is, it's kind of crazy, and I know we were kind of not necessarily. No one was really blinded. No one was happy about the Nations League victories. No one was happy about the Gold Cup victories. It was just kind of this. Here's this shiny thing that we achieved, even though it was very underwhelming the entire process through. Mexico hasn't looked like Mexico in years. U.S. the question is, when are we finally going to see this golden generation? If it is the golden generation, finally look like it. And then I have my doubts about this generation, because of the way that they played with Berhalter, and then BJ Callahan just ruined everything that Berhalter had, because the second BJ Callahan stepped in as interim manager, this team played like the best football, and I'll say football because that's exactly how they played. It was the best football I ever seen from this generation of U.S. national team players. It was just fluid. It was fun. They were dominating.
It was attacking.
It was great, and then obviously Berhalter was hired back on, which forced Callahan to play stupid Berhalter ball, and so yeah, and we saw the glimpse of it, and then Berhalter with his stupid bounce passes had to come back. So
yeah, it's wild to me that you look at Berhalter's record. The only team he beat that we should have beat or shouldn't have beat at any point in time in his tenure was Mexico, which is wild. But that tells you how bad Mexico was. To put the shoe on the other foot and to look at the Mexican national team for a second. The Mexican national team, since Jordan Morris came off the bench in 2016 and scored 2 goals, and we heard Dos a Cero every single time they met up afterwards, ever since that game, Mexico has just not looked good. And obviously in that game, there was a lot of changing points for Mexico, right? They got rid of the old guard. You lost Guardado. You lost a lot of other talent in that team. The only one that really stuck around was Ochoa. And from there, you slowly evolved and seen the desperate nature of Mexican soccer kind of come to the forefront of the national team, to the point where they're not giving managers more than 3 games in some cases, let alone giving them a year or 2 years to build something within that team. I mean, what was it? One of them was a game and a half, and he got fired because of whatever reason they want to come up with. 3 games for another manager, and then it's not been good.
I'm actually impressed how long Jimmy Lozano.
Yeah, it was the first time in what, almost 7 years we saw a guy last longer than a year. It's wild to consider. And it sucks too, because as a Jersey fan, Mexican jerseys are some of my favorite, even despite the rivalry. so I don't get to see that jersey shining out. Now it's looked at like, all right, well, we're going to burn these jerseys because this is just awful. Let's wipe this and flush the memory bank. And so, you look at Mexico and look what they're doing. They have talent. They have talent playing in top teams in the top leagues in the world, all across the board. Obviously,
and you're
Lozano
going
coming back.
and you're going to see some other players also go to Europe. I know Chino Huerta is a name that is linked to. I forgot what league he's going to, but he's linked to Europe.
Italy. Wow. Italy, if I'm not mistaken. He's looked one of the Serie A teams is looking at him.
So I mean, so there's positive that a lot of the young specifically the young Mexican players are getting potential moves to Europe, which is something that I think the Liga MX and the Mexican Federation need to do a little bit of a better job of making sure that it helps the teams out when they get these transfers in for some of their top players, but it also helps the league. I mean, I've praised Guardado for a very long time. Actually, has been one of my personal favorite players growing up to watch him play. And once again, I always say he's probably the best representation of what a Mexican player can do in Europe, and he's done a very good job. Like I said, the dude's a legend at Real Betis. So
I mean, adding Rafa Marquez into that generation as well.
Rafa Marquez as well. And I think for a good while with Mexico, you always had the next man up, the next guy up for Mexico. You lose a Rafa Marquez, you get trying to think of a.
Actually, I think they replaced Rafa with in the CDM role a little bit more with Guardado later in Guardado's career, technically. So
well, I mean, Guardado. Obviously you lose a Torrado, and you get a Hector Herrera. You lose a Omar Bravo, and you get a Chicharito. Yeah, and you lose a Osvaldo Sanchez, and you get a Memo Ochoa. And unfortunately, there hasn't been any of those names that we've been seeing. There's some guys that were like, hey, that guy may be good. We just need to see him play more. I think Alexi Vega has shown his worth. I think people need to stop dissing that man. He's done a very good job. I've been someone that has watched his career because just seeing him in Liga MX, initially playing with Toluca and then going to Chivas and then going back to Toluca. The guy needs to go to Europe. He needs to go to Europe. I think he's more than capable of it. Unfortunately, Tecatito just never lived up to, not so much of his quality. It's just because of injuries happening for him. But, we missed out on the Raul Jimenez era. And that's not necessarily Mexico's fault. That's just what happened to him. But you have some players with some high potential. Santi Jimenez, a name that I'm sure is linked to some big next big move.
Should be linked to a lot of big moves, honestly. Yeah. Just name a team and they're going to open their book, it seems like.
So, he's a name. I think he's someone that Mexico needs to build around and getting those players to that next generation of players, whoever that's going to be. Did we see some here in Copa America? I think we did. If there's some positive for Mexico, is I think that we did see that there is some players ready to represent L3. And we also know maybe we need Edson Alvarez to be in the midfield, not as a center back. That's just me. But
yeah, that would help out. But no, and then on the flip side, obviously we talk the U.S. and who's not aging out players right now. And that's the thing is with the U.S. is your players are now entering 26 in what is the prime of their supposedly playing careers. You mean maybe even subprime, like just prior to their primes for some of these guys. Look at the Aronson brothers as an example. Any one of the strikers is entering. They're going to be 26 when this World Cup comes around. The talent's there. It's just like you mentioned, BJ Callahan. The difference between BJ Callahan and Berhalter is the fearlessness that they played with in the attack with Callahan. And then with Berhalter, he's so focused on possession and tactics, it put the players in a position to be scared attacking them. They did not attack. And it's similar to we've seen a lot of different nations go through this where you have a change in manager, change in philosophies. And it's almost like a breath of fresh air when somebody like BJ Callahan came in and to see him do what he did and then be relegated back to playing scared, tactically based possession football when this team is not built for that. And if anybody questions my thoughts on that, go back and listen to any one of the appearances I've had on this talking about the U.S. men's national team. The best ability that any U.S. men's national team has is that they run faster than everybody and their stamina is top notch. And so their athleticism is well above the majority, if not almost all of the countries out there that they're going to be facing. And that talent, to be able to use that, is what made 2002 great. It's what made 2006 teams competitive. It's what made 2010 a good World Cup run in South Africa. But the difference being in this team, the athleticism was there, but they weren't allowed to use it in the attack. And so now you look at the future. Obviously, they're bringing in a manager. Can that manager take advantage of the athleticism on par and maybe not make it so tactic focused with these kids who are able and willing to play smart, fluid football if they're given the opportunity? And I hate that Jurgen Klopp said no, not happening, because he loves athletic players. It's what makes him so good. So if there's a manager out there that can do that,
he's just hitting a sabbatical. So
yeah, he's taking a break. He's a well-deserved break, by the way. But I wish he would come to the U.S. But obviously that's a different conversation. It's just now, if you're the U.S., you got to look for the future. Mexico, now you have to figure out your identity as you replace these players and get new guys in. The U.S. just needs a coach to come in to make the pieces work. So two different stories there on what needs to be done, but at the same time, this explosion in the Copa was just awful.
Yeah, I mean that there's going to be a lot of questions with CONCACAF. Obviously, Canada, USA, and Mexico. No worries about qualifying for the World Cup. Yeah. They're in it. They're hosting it. I think to go and kind of segue into my final takeaway is it's going to be interesting to see who are those three teams that will be representing CONCACAF along with USA, Mexico, and Canada. I know this is Copa America, this is CONMEBOL, and we should probably be talking about more of the CONMEBOL teams. But I think that, Panama continue to improve every year, it seems like, it's an exciting thing to watch for them. Obviously they did what they needed to do. They won their matches. They got the surprise of the century in beating USA. And then they did I think that's the thing when you just go back to the U.S. for just a tiny bit, but the U.S. they were supposed to win the games they were supposed to win. We knew no one was expecting them to beat Uruguay, even if they were able to get a draw. No one was expecting a victory from Uruguay. What was expected was to win the matches they were supposed to win. They're supposed to beat Bolivia. Normally, you should be able to beat Panama, and you didn't get the result. And some people will say it's Tim Weah's fault, but I don't think it was Tim Weah's fault by any means. It's just a discipline issue. It's
a management issue.
In the management issue.
Well, sorry. It's a discipline issue that stems from a manager not managing players. Sorry, let me extend that a little bit further
So you couldn't hold your lead when you were down a man, which everyone knows. You're down a man. You have the 1-goal lead. Just do what you can to keep the ball away from the net. And sloppiness, and that's why Panama was able to pounce. It wasn't for the fact that Coca Carrasquilla got a red card. That dude was just playing around in the midfield. He was having his day. And I mean, I get to give props to Coca Carrasquilla just because he plays for Dynamo. But I mean, the dude was just drawing the strings.
Oh yeah.
And so it's gonna be interesting to see who gets to come out for CONCACAF. And so that's my thing that I'm really intrigued about what's gonna happen with CONCACAF, because now it's wide open.
Yeah, it is, and it's scary. If you look at the teams that are going to fill this, because you have, in my opinion, I'd say 5 teams that are vying for 3 spots. Obviously, you mentioned Panama. You also have Jamaica, who didn't make it out of their group in this one. Then you also have a team that didn't even make the Copa, which is Honduras, that just sits there and floats out there, but is always a pain in the neck when it comes to qualifying situations. And then Costa Rica, right, is still...
I'll even throw Guatemala.
Yeah. And so there's still teams that can cause problems for CONCACAF. I guess trying to figure out a next 3, if you will. This has always been the problem in CONCACAF. You had your big 3, then you had the hexagonal, which is like the rest of the groups, basically. And this is always going to be the interesting thing is what comes out of it. And, you don't have a team in that second, third set that's like a Venezuela was in this tournament where they surprised everybody and did well, because the next three teams are, they have one or two guys that play overseas, but then everybody else is just kind of fill-ins, right? That's kind of how it feels. And I don't mean to slight any one of these teams. If they're listening to, I'm not slighting you, Reggae Boys. I don't need any the trash talk you gave to Chad Johnson. But at the same time, you look at their teams and their talent is there. It's evident, but it's just, all right, who's going to show up to put it in, to put in the work for 90 minutes come game time is going to be the question.
I mean, who fills in for Leon Bailey?
yeah, really. Who does? And so that's always going to be the question when you look at Jamaica, when you look at Panama, when you look at any one of the teams we just mentioned, Honduras. It's going to be who shows up consistently for 90 minutes over 3-4 game stretch to get them qualified for CONCACAF. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see, because not only do they have to qualify, but then they got to show up and do something in the group stages. And that's, can they do it? We'll see. Because in the World Cup, CONCACAF teams do not have a high rate of success outside of the U.S. and Mexico. So that's something to consider. Now, U.S., Mexico, Canada get the auto bids. Can somebody step up and do well? That's going to be a question.